Now we're going to go live at Facebook. I'm glad it's working now. It's taken me 2 weeks to get it to work, but anyway, just perfect for today. Oh, okay, and just where we're going to share it now, and it's publishing, and we can go live, and I can return back to us on Zoom, and of course you're in the spotlight. So let's get started. So welcome to our final session of today. This is the Voices of Strength Summit, where most of the men in this amazing book, you can see it behind me as well, Voices of Strength, they found their vulnerability and they found the strength to speak their truth. And because they were fed up of living a life that people were telling them, this is what you should do. No, they found the courage to say no to the status quo, forge their own path, and find their own style of leadership to support and help others do the same. And particularly with men, this is something that men can find quite difficult because men have been indoctrinated for millennia as how they should be. Example, someone spoke about it today, big boys don't cry, for example. Of course, big boys do cry. And with that, let me introduce to you the wonderful Dexter Moscow, author of A Voyage Without My Father, where he is exceedingly vulnerable in that, shows great strength, as well as Stand Up and Sell, and I'm sure there's a few other titles in there. He is the silver fox with the silver tongue, and if you want to know how to present, just watch the master in action. I hope I'm not putting you too much on the spot there, Dexter. So without further ado, I just want to hand over right now to the wonderful, the incredible, the delectable Dexter Moscow.
Oh my goodness, Brendan. No pressure then at all. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this chat. And also thank you so much for inviting me to tell my story in this wonderful book, Voices of Strength. I'm currently in Tenerife, and I'm not saying that to make people jealous, but because I'm in an apartment as part of a complex, I'm not sure how good the internet here is. So if suddenly I freeze, then I apologize. And then normally, have you noticed when we're on these kind of calls and we freeze, the expression is the worst possible expression you can imagine. So I'm going to try and not do that. But if I do, then please bear with me. Brenda mentioned that I had written this book, A Voyage Without My Father. And really, my contribution to Voices of Strength was to talk more about that. And she is right, Brenda, you're right, that men don't talk about these things. And what we do, this British thing, in fact, it is an international thing, of this stiff upper lip. It doesn't help us. And I'll explain what happened to me briefly, and then where this relates to how I hope what I've said in Voices of Strength gives some benefits and some impact on those that are suffering from grief. And grief is in many ways, it can be abandonment. My story is about death, or it could be that somebody has just disregarded somebody, that they don't feel worthy because of what somebody has done. So let me launch into a little bit of my story. When I was 10, my father died. He was only 45. And this was at a time when stents weren't invented. Nobody knew about how to support an artery. And he died of coronary thrombosis. He literally was taken into village hospital, a cottage hospital, and left to die because there was no open heart surgery. Statins hadn't been invented to help the blood supply. And what happened for me was that, and it's my greatest regret, and it's a regret that stayed with me not only in my childhood when I experienced the death of my father, but right the way through into my adulthood. He died when he was 45, as I said, and my crisis point, where I had to have understanding and ultimately strength, was came to being there. And what happened was this regret was that I wasn't allowed, because children weren't allowed in hospital wards at that time, I wasn't allowed to go in to say goodbye to my father. And coincidentally and thankfully, and I say that because I hope what I have written in The Voyage Without My Father benefits those who suffered through the pandemic, because so many, countless millions of us were not allowed to say goodbye to our loved ones because we weren't allowed in the hospitals. And of course, this amazing and tremendous burden fell on doctors and nurses to hold the hands of our loved ones. And so this regret that started when I was young, and I think, at 10 years old, I understood what death was. I knew that my dad was not going to be there anymore, but the full impact of that happened when I was much older, as I said, in my 40s. And what happened then was that one Christmas, my boys were in front of, and I have twin sons, God bless them. They're of an age now where I can't really call them boys. They are men, not even young men, as you can see by my grey hair. Thank you, Brenda, for saying it's silver fox. I'm not sure so much about silver fox or dome of some kind. Yeah, and it was one Christmas, and the boys were standing in front of the Christmas tree, and I was taking a photograph of them in their C-3PO Star Wars outfits, and they were mucking about. And I got very angry. And, when that lip starts to quiver, and it really impacted me. And I found at that time that I was getting angry at the silliest things. If they were to cry about a lost toy, I got angry with them. And I turned to my wife, Fran, and we have been partners in marriage now for about 55 years. So we know a lot about each other. I was a child bride, of course. And what happened then was that Fran said to me, "This is not right. You need to do something about this." And so realizing that this was not right, and it came to a really crisis point. I was driving into my office, an estate agent's office in Harrow, and don't worry, I'm no longer an estate agent, so don't hold that against me. And so I was driving to my office, and I heard on the radio a song by Mike and the Mechanics, and it's called "In the Living Years." And one of the lyrics, and they're very profound lyrics, obviously the guy who wrote it had lost his father, not necessarily when he was young, but the impact of this. And this lyric line was, "I was not there that morning when my father passed away." And it really hit me. I was driving along and suddenly I couldn't see the road for the tears that were streaming from my eyes. So I had to pull over, and I realized that this was crisis. So with Fran's help, we identified a psychiatrist. And for about a year and a half, I was under his wing. And we talked about many things, the loss of my father, and ultimately what came out 18 months later, amongst other things, and I won't decry the speaking therapies because people find this very beneficial. I did to a certain extent, but what came out of it was that I was angry at my father for dying. Okay, so what do you do with that? I can't talk to him. I can't say how angry I am with him, but can I? And this is, if you like, the nub of what I've written about in Voices of Strength, and also in my book, A Voice Without My Father, because I went on this journey of self-discovery. I had always been a student of the human condition. When I was an estate agent, I trained estate agents to be more empathetic with their clients, be they their vendors or the buyers. And some people would now say that they're not so empathetic as pathetic, but that's another story. But the fact was that I had already attuned myself to understanding what motivates people. And so I wanted to find out what motivates me, because there's another line in that wonderful song, and I do recommend it. With perhaps a tissue in your hand, you have a listen to that song, because there's another line in it which says, "We are held hostage to our parents' hopes and fears." And this was certainly true of me. I went into advertising because my father had always wanted to be a copywriter. He never was able to achieve that because he went to war, he came back and was thrust into a different profession. So I followed that wish of his. And so this journey of self-discovery, understanding what some of that motivation, that personal motivation was, I found that, how can I describe it best? That when you go to a meditative level, that can be very healing for you. And I read recently that Warren Buffett, this incredible entrepreneur and investor, he does not pick up his telephone or look at his computer until he's meditated first thing in the morning. So I found this idea of meditation, not transcendental, not sitting there in sackcloth and ashes with humming, but just through a breathing process, go to a deeper level of consciousness. And I've coined this idea, if you like, following on from how do I communicate with my father when he's no longer here. And I called it MIC, meditation, imagination, and communication. The meditation bit I've already described, that you go to a deeper level. And whilst you're at that deeper level, you imagine that you are talking to that person. And it doesn't have to be somebody who has passed. It can be somebody perhaps that you are at loggerheads with, you're having an argument, or simply need to understand them better. Because what happens when you are at meditative level and in your imagination, you're sitting in one seat and they're sitting in the other seat. And you're having the discussion. You're saying what you feel to them. And I make no apologies for using this word repeatedly, feel, because there is a realism and it's a universal truth. People understand emotion before they can connect with the logic. And I teach people how to sell. So that's a very important thing. People buy emotionally, they decide logically. So don't be frightened of true emotion. This is what we're talking about today. That voices of strength is enabling you to show your emotion as well. So when you, in your imagination, you're having this conversation, and in my circumstance, I walked into the hospital ward. I imagined that I was walking there, and I saw the curtains that cover the beds of people who are going to pass. And I opened the curtains in my imagination, and I sat and I saw my father, and I said to him, "Dad, how dare you leave me at such an important time in my life?" So that's the M and the I, the imagination. The C is the communication. And we had this conversation, this communication. I told him exactly how I felt. And in my imagination, he told me how he felt, that he was desperately sorry that he had been a chain smoker, that he was overweight, that perhaps this exacerbated his coronary thrombosis. And then he said, but there's nothing I could do about it. These situations that you experience now that save people and save lives every day was not open to me. So I came out of that meditation, and the weight that was on my shoulders, I felt it physically lifting. And it was so powerful. Yes, I'd been through that psychotherapy over that period of time. But for me, that conversation, meditation, imagination, communication. So if you have lost a loved one, If you are at loggerheads, if you're having an argument with somebody, don't let it repeat in your head. Don't let it continue to have that damaging conversation. Either have the courage to say, I want to speak to you, or I want to write to you. I recommend actually not to write, because you could write it out and then never send it. Never send the first draft. Brenda knows this about the book. You know, you can write the book, but you need somebody who really understands editing, publishing, and we all know about Brenda's wonderful team. You know, all of those people that help her. So the key there is you never ever send the first draft. And if possible, don't even send it. The fact that you've written it down, you know what you need to say, you know what you want to say, and then you can have that conversation with that individual. And if you want to practice it, it's called Gestalt therapy. It's the two chairs therapy, where you take both roles. So that literally, you know, there's that story about if you want to understand somebody, walk a mile in their moccasins. It's you know, a very old Native American phrase, but it's so important to understand the other person. Some of my coaching and my learning was with Dale Carnegie, and one of the principles of there's 30 human relationship principles, and one of those principles is try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And it's helpful, certainly, if you are a coach, if you are somebody who is really interested in other people. And I know those of us who are authors, we need to understand other people. We need to understand their condition and also how to get the message across. So for me, this is very releasing. And I hope that, you know, whether you're in grief, whether you find you've been abandoned as a child, whether it's a divorce situation, have that conversation. If they are still here, then try it and have the courage to do that. But don't allow it to continually be within your head. There's a very good book, and I don't know why I'm advertising other people's books. Brenda, I apologize for this. But there is a book called The Untethered Soul. And the basis of this, it's an American publication. I listen to it. I like hearing audiobooks apart from reading and making notes in the margins. That's the power of having a proper book. But in this particular instance, I was listening to it, and it's about that conversation that we have in our heads with other people who are not there. And it's stupid, actually, isn't it? Because we keep on having these arguments. You know, we have it when we're driving along in the car, and you know, somebody cuts us up, and we have this argument, and we wait for hours to finish that conversation. It's not worthwhile. So have a think about how that self-talk. Now, Brenda, talking about talk, I've been speaking for the last 17 minutes. Brenda, is there a particular question that you want to ask me of what we've just been talking about?
No, it's just, I just find it quite fascinating, even although I know your story, that when you hear it, and I read the bit that you spoke about, and I found myself crying yet again. I thought, oh my God, you know, and this is the power of story, because you will find something in everybody's story will have some form of resonance with you, and what it does, it just opens things up for you to look at. And you, in some of the techniques that you were talking about, some of them are also used in NLP as well. And I know you do positive psychology, but
Yes.
you know, the technique of taking yourself out of yourself and putting yourself in another person's shoes is amazing. But in NLP as well, Dexter, you have the conversation, but you become a third person, the fly in the wall. And really, when you become the third person in the fly in the wall, you can actually see sometimes the nonsense in a conversation, or you can see the power in that conversation, or you can see, oh my goodness, this has just been a waste of time and energy, because there's more things that you should be focusing on instead. So all these things are really important. So you've talked about I like your mic, your meditation, your gotten already,
Imagination.
meditation, imagination, that was it, imagination and communication. Very, very important. If you get any other tips like that that you could share with people around self-talk or around just changing their emotional state using positive psychology?
Yes, I think that I'm a student of Stoicism. It's something that I've been reading a lot about, and I think there's a lot of NLP in Stoicism, but we know that these kind of therapies and these ideas are quite ancient,
Yeah.
and in the value of them has never changed. And so Stoicism, one of the abiding principles of Stoicism is to realize that the only thing that we have control over is our own reaction to any given situation. And the link to that is that there are things that we do have control over. And we're living in a world where we feel out of control. And there's things that are out of control. And I won't go into that because that's not the topic of today. But it's the realization that we can only control the things that we have control over. And we should not worry about those other things. We can be concerned. We can be concerned for the other person, the other individual, the other section of community. But and we can still add to that, food banks or just being there for people. So that's important, but that's within our control. The other stuff, accept it, don't worry about it, because we can't worry about that. But the thing I would say, and as you say, I am a student of psychology. I work with a system called positive intelligence. And this is really in answer to your question. What do we need to do to calm ourselves down, to think more positively? Because when people say that to me, I think, oh my God, how can you feel positive when you're going through all of this? And I nearly said a rude word there, but how can you do that? And the answer is, and you said it as well, storytelling. Tell yourself your success stories. Write your success stories down. Because when you do that, and I call it the cloak of confidence. It's like Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility. This is our cloak of confidence. Because when you've written those stories, and I'll give you a framework for story writing, which actually is Dale Carnegie as well. When you do that, when you write succinctly, if you come to a situation where you feel less than, or less confident, or fearful of making a fool of yourself, then these stories are the things that bolster you. These are the things that say, wait a minute, I did that. If I've done that, I can do that again. And the framework for 2 minutes of storytelling is incident, action, and benefit. The incident is the overarching situation. And if I may, I'll tell you a quick story of how that really impacted me from a business perspective. So incident is the overarching thing, and that could be about 15 seconds. The action is what you actually did. And when we're telling a story to others, we make it as sensory rich as possible. As you talked about the NLP, when we use words that take people on a journey, that's really impactful and it gets our message across impactfully. So that's the majority of the story, the action. And the benefit, and in terms of when you're coaching somebody, when you're conveying a message that you want them to follow, to take action for you and for them, it's the benefit statement. And that again is about 15, perhaps 30 seconds. And it may be just about 7 to 10 words. So if I may, Brenda, I'm going to tell very quickly this story of what has happened for me. I was working for Sainsbury's as a consultant, and we were buying a street of houses in Kenton, in Harrow. And these houses had very long gardens. And so what we needed to do was buy the houses to cut the back of the gardens, half the gardens, to improve the footprint of the store, because that was a requirement of the local authority. Well, I was doing very well, meeting with people, meeting with pressure groups, and hopefully influencing and persuading them, paying them much more money than they would have got for their house on the open market. So everybody was happy. We weren't trying to be shysters or ever in any way. But this one guy held out. He wouldn't even let me go and see him. And one day he phoned me and he said, "Mr. Moscow, I don't want to see you, but I want estate agent's details." So I got a stack of estate agent's details and I delivered them to his front door. He phoned me the next day. He said, "Mr. Moscow, you're unprofessional." The hackles on the back of my neck stood up because I pride myself on my professionalism. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I used the same level of intensity of his words and his anger as in my voice. And so he said, "Well, I went to all of these estate agents, they didn't even know me." I said, "That was not the deal. He wouldn't even let me in the front door. All I ever wanted to do was come and speak to you." He said, "I'm available Thursday." I said, "That's not going to be convenient. I'll see you Wednesday." So I came and sat outside his front door and I thought, how am I going to convince this man? And I did use a meditative technique. And the word histories came to me. Where it comes from, I don't know, but histories. So I knocked on the door, aggressively opened the door. It didn't even invite me in. But I said to him, "Look, before you even invite me in," and he hadn't, "tell me your history." And he said, "Well, I was born and bred in Iraq. And there was a regime change in Iraq. And I was sent to Iran. And I was a professor in Iran. And when the Shah of Iran was deposed, I was kicked out again." So I said to him, "Wait a minute. You've been dispossessed twice, and I'm seeking to do it again. We'll find a way around it." Ultimately, we did the deal. He got more money than anybody else in the road. But he actually said to me, "Dex, I want you to come and have a look at a house that I'm buying." I said, "I'm not a surveyor." He said, "I don't care. I trust your judgment." We became very good friends. And if you like the punchline, the life lesson, the benefit statement is, if you want to understand somebody, understand their history. So I hope that that is encapsulated what I consider to be a great success story. And
Yeah.
I hope that that stimulates you to think of your successes.
Absolutely brilliant. And I love everything you're doing's got a rule of three in it. And for me, that's brilliant. That's universal. And the human brain just loves that, you know. So absolutely fantastic. I talk about, you know, having your success stories. I talk about having a brag bag. And it's where you put the success stories. Now, it could be digital, so you've got a folder on your computer and you call it brag bag. Or you can go and get a bag that looks beautiful, that's got great value, not just an old tattered one, but something that you look at and you think, "Oh, I really like that bag." Oh, and then on those days where you don't feel good about yourself, imposter syndrome, overwhelm, all the things, or somebody's done something, and you know, I know what it's like when you are a person of integrity and you're challenged because of someone else's perception. The heckles do come up on the back of you. You think, "What do you mean? I do my best by everybody all the time." But you know, you have to learn how you respond to that, you see. So you just smile and agree with them, and then they're flummoxed, you know. But anyway, if you've got a brag bag as well, that's another little strategy. And it's a great one, you know, that you can just open that bag someday and you come out and you think, "Oh, look what so-and-so, look what Dexter said about me. Look what Dexter said about my team. Look what Dexter said about how good we were in supporting him and getting his book out there, and #1 on the day it was published, etc., etc." You know, so you need the stories. You're right. You need the success stories to remind yourself. That will change your state. It will change your mindset. It will change your emotion. And brilliant. So Dexter, Judith, I don't know if you're listening, or I don't know if you're doing something else. Oh, here she comes. Do you have a question for our wonderful Dexter?
I do. And do you know, I had to change my question because I know this gentleman is so good. He actually answered my question and gave an example for it. So I was like, curses, foiled again, because I was going to ask about leading with heart. And I was going off when you said, you know, people by emotion but decide logic. So I was going to say, so how then can we teach people empathy? and to include emotion in decision making. Obviously, you gave us a great example of doing that. The other half of that was going to be, where is the place for emotion in decision making, do you think? Again, you've already really sort of answered that for me. However, I have another question, because I thought, right, I need a backup question now that you've answered my question. So here it goes. Have you ever had a situation where it was the other way around? So people were buying the logic and basing their decisions perhaps on logic, perhaps on emotion. And what did you do about it, if you have?
That's a very interesting, quite a deep question as well, because majority of people will say, I buy on logic. And, part of my career was at QVC, the shopping channel. So because people knew I presented at the front of the room. And so they said to me, would you come and sell some products for us on QVC? I don't know if you've ever watched QVC. QVC is literally a worldwide shopping channel, and it sells all manner of products, from computers down to household cleaning products. So the whole gamut. If you like, it's like an online Argos. You can buy anything there, and it is live TV. And people would say, why do I buy something? Why do I buy a computer? Oh, because it's got so much memory. It's got so many programs on it that are going to be useful for me. And they say that this is logic. People buy a car and they say, I need engine capacity, I need 4 doors, and it's going to be in blue. And they say, that's a logical decision. I buy a house because it has a certain number of bedrooms and it's got a garden. And then they stop. And we think that actually most of those purchases are emotional purchases first. How many times when you, and I don't know if you bought a property, but you go in, and this is my estate agent stuff coming out again, when you walk into a property, you hear people, I heard people so many times and say, do you know, this feels right. The other one we saw, I don't know what it was, and I can see my furniture over there. It just feels right. Or when they get into a car and this, that smell of a new car, the feel of the leather under their bottoms, that's the emotion. And so there is a logical element, but it is a universal truth. People buy emotionally. And unless we connect with them emotionally, we sold products on QVC, but no services, only products. And it was all about the story that we told to put the product in their hands. It's almost like the theatre. When we go to the theatre, we're sitting in an audience and we're in this unreal situation. But at some point, suspension of disbelief happens. And we are part of that action. It happens in the cinema. And we're brought into the characters and the story emotionally. So the answer to your question is, they may say they decide logically, and they do, but the emotion is there first. And it's about buying us first. So when we make that emotional connection and we are authentic, and a lot of the conversations you've heard is today about authenticity. That's the important thing. People buy emotionally, they decide logically. But those two elements, an emotion first, then the logic. Does that make sense to you?
It does, thank you. I have a couple more questions, but I won't ask them yet. I might ask you offline, depending on how much time we've got and what Brenda feels like we need to do now.
Well, Dexter, you've actually got through quite quickly. So Judith, ask another question, because I'm sure somebody else will be thinking about it.
So it tacks off the back of the last one and the conversation we've been having and what you brought in about emotions and all that kind of stuff. Because obviously in my world, in privacy and data protection world, not to take it over with that by any means, but just to establish the link between what I'm thinking. There's a lot of talk at the moment about emotion recognition and behavioral advertising and targeting people based on how you think they're perhaps going to I won't say react, I'll say respond to something. What are your feelings about that as a course of getting through to people? And then the secondary question, depending on time and depending how you feel and whether you feel like this is one to answer now or another day, is how do you feel about subliminal messaging? Because my understanding is that at some point in the distant past, I think, not in the recent past, although I don't know, it might still be being used today, although I think emotional behavioral recognition and tracking eye movements and stuff has overtaken that somewhat. How do you feel about subliminal messaging? Do you know, is it still being used, or have you had instances of that? And how do you think the manipulative side is also coming out, and how can we stop ourselves being manipulated emotionally so that we either get a fair deal or so that we don't get somebody getting one up on us when perhaps they shouldn't?
There's a lot in there, Judith.
My awkward questions, you know you love them, Brenda.
It's very relevant as well, Judith. I think, and a part of my career was in advertising. As I said, I followed my father, his wish, into advertising, and I worked for an American advertising company, which ultimately we found it was partly owned by the mafia. And certainly, when I was in advertising, there was subliminal usage where you had a message flashed very quickly on the screen, almost imperceptible. It was certainly imperceptible to the naked eye, but we received it as an image in our brain. And this was outlawed. Whether it still happens, I don't know. But I think that in answer to that a very deep question about embedded messaging, and we know that NLP is about embedded commands, using people's language to make that connection with them. And not wishing to be political, but I'm going to be, we see this in America with the disinformation, with this cult situation, that no matter how much proof is given to these individuals, it's almost a messianic belief. And in some cases, I think it is a messianic belief. God help us. And so I think that the way that we can guard against it is to be seekers for the truth. And as we see so often with TikTok, with other information, and you know that there are certain people that are under investigation for sexual misconduct, for various other things like that, which we have followed at some time because of their audacity, if it's the right word. So my answer, and if I had the opportunity, and sometimes I do, to go and speak to students, and I will say, the key thing is to question. Keep on asking questions until you get a satisfactory answer. And actually, it works in a business environment as well. There's the 70-30 rule. That's not Pareto, the 80-20 rule. The 70-30 rule is in any situation where you are seeking to influence or persuade somebody with authenticity, is to do 30% of the talking and allow them to do 70% of the talking. So I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think 70% of the talking would be? Or what is our 30% to get them to speak 70%? What do you reckon?
So, well, from my perspective and what I endeavour to do, although Brenda has heard me talk the hind legs off a donkey, so it possibly also means me shutting up more, doesn't it, Brenda, really? Let's be honest. But it's some of the things that I will probably be talking about when it comes to the Ladies' Summit for our books, and it is to do with asking, called Voices of Women. There you go. Plug, shameless plug. There you go.
Was that subliminal? No, it was right in front of your face. Look what's going on behind me, for goodness sake. We all do it. But it's done with, yeah. If you don't mind, if I can come in for a wee minute. Actually, I should let you answer the question before we forget. Carry on.
Yeah, so
okay, very quickly, 70-30, and then I'll see if I can keep to the 30 rather than the 70. That's anybody. Make him laugh. That's always a good one. So tell a joke, ask them questions, That
That's
means
the
you
one.
get to sit back and listen.
That's the one. Because when you do the majority of the talking, you're not finding out about them. And so when that 30% is asking permission to ask deeper and more searching questions, then you're understanding the other person. Yeah, and I have many mantras, and one of them is you seek to understand the other person. And the key is in any networking situation, any situation where you're trying to influence and persuade. Notice I haven't said sell, but influence and persuade is this key mantra. Don't tell people what you do, tell them what you have done for others. So it again taps into that storytelling, which again taps into the emotional connection. So we have to be careful. We live in a world of disinformation. There's a lot going on at the present moment, which is terrifying. And I refuse to watch the news. I certainly refuse, and perhaps this is wrong to say in this environment, but I'm very concerned about the bias reporting of the BBC. And so seek where you know that there is value and authenticity and credibility. Question everything. Question everything. And then, you are a very intelligent person that can make the decision of what is manipulation, be it subliminal, God help us, or real. That's the thing.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say earlier was, when we go back to being vulnerable and authentic and finding courage, I always think if you speak your truth with love, because you say to me, oh yeah, because I'm always going, oh, voice your truth, speak your truth, but your truth isn't bringing down another human being. Your truth is about you and what you believe. So it should always come from that place. But I say, and this is how I live my life, is that when I say something, I'm going to say it with love, I'm going to speak my truth with love. And the truth is based on my experience, my expertise, my education, all of these things that's right for me. And you're not forcing it down someone else as, if it's right for me, it must be right for you. No. We come, and one of the first things I learned in teaching, it was all about, children come to school with different sense, different perceptions of what is, based on what their background is and what their experiences is. So when you've got 30 kids sitting in front of you and you're saying one thing to them, they're all going to understand it from a different perspective. They're going to understand it from that baggage, if you like, or those experiences that they bring. I've forgotten, there is a technical term for it and I've forgotten it right at the moment. It will come back to me. And it's based on a philosophy and that's taught about that when you're dealing with people, it's going back to empathy. You've got to kind of understand, well, where are they coming from? And for me, I feel that's a gift. But for others, you do need to teach, and you do need to keep talking about it, so that one day they can go, instead of reacting and jumping in, they can take a deep breath and go, well, maybe they're doing that because, so like you found out, Dexter, that it took 30 years for you to discover that you were angry with your father for dying. But you didn't know that until you started walking and doing other work with yourself. And then that your whole mind opened up, your heart changed, and you could understand. So if you can do it for yourself, learn to do it for other people, because we live in a world of blame, shame, and when something goes wrong, you see it all the time on the news, people want to blame somebody, an aeroplane falls out the sky, who's to blame for that aeroplane falling out the sky? I fell in the river, who's to blame for falling in the river? Well, it's not my fault that I fell in the river, it's got to be somebody else's fault. No, sometimes it is our fault because we're not thinking clearly, or a whole set of circumstances and whatever, so I think it's important to speak your truth, but to speak it with love and compassion. Maybe that's the word I want to say. I don't know if anybody
Absolutely.
wants to say anything about what I've just said there. I kind of got on the high horse, and I'm sorry.
I,
We're all
I think
passionate.
it is absolutely true, and you know, the Voices of Strength is about that. It's about being true to oneself, and you know, there's that phrase, isn't there, that vulnerability is not a weakness; it's a strength. And when we can be vulnerable, when we can go from the heart, and it sounds so strange, doesn't it, in the world in which we live, in this business environment. But we know the most successful companies are those that offer recognition, not necessarily financial recognition, but they offer recognition to their employees. They recognize them in front of other employees, and appreciating that we're running out of time. Well, one of the other stories I would tell was that when I was working as a consultant for Marks and Spencer's, and it was at a time where Marks and Spencer was under threat to be bought out by somebody that none of the shoppers wanted. And so they brought in Stuart Rose, now Sir Stuart Rose. And whenever there was an announcement, a financial announcement to be made, he brought all of the staff together in the refectory in Paddington, which was their offices at that time. And he told them first what was happening with the company. And he had what he called leadership by walking around. And it led to a campaign where, because Marks and Spencer's were under attack from being purchased, he asked the people on the shop floor, what's happening? And they came in and they said to him, well, what they were saying is that person, and I forget what it was, somebody green, and they said, he's not going to have our Marks and Spencer's. And he changed the whole advertising campaign to be your Marks and Spencer's. Now, if that ain't emotional,
Yeah. Oh, well, we have come to the end. It's been an amazing day one of the Voices of Strength Summit. We've had 6 amazing men share stories, share the wisdom, and be raw and real, as I say. They've all been vulnerable. They've all shown great strength of character. And I am so privileged to have you all in our little family is part of Voices of Strength. We've done a number of things together, and so it continues, because it's the ripples of brilliance that's important for me. We have messages all to share, and to share them across the world, and that's how we're going to do it. So everybody, this has been the wonderful Dexter Moscow, talking with his Voice of Strength, and the wonderful voice of woman, Judith Ratcliffe, who we will get to know even more over the next 12 months as we embark on our journey together. So everybody, remember, be brilliant, be yourself. Much love. And until the next time, until tomorrow, first session, 10 a.m.
See you then.
Toodle
God
pip.
bless.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.